Okay, so Richard, welcome to the Alex Manos podcast, and thank you for sparing some time to come and speak with me today.
Thank you, Alex. Very happy to be here.
So, for people that might not be familiar with you or your work, are you happy, Richard, just to share a little bit of your backstory, how you started out maybe, and what got you into breathwork and everything else that you do as well?
Yeah, so I started in corporate real estate, did my master's, followed the family journey into being a chartered surveyor, whilst at the same time getting very much into the gym and fitness modeling. And at the same time, I was quite depressed and anxious and suicidal for many years. And I'd been brought up in this society where we think success will make you happy. And I thought, okay, I'll be successful, I'll get a good job. And the ultimate success for me at that time as sort of a 21, 22, 23-year-old would be to appear in Men's Health. And so I set my sights on that. I did it. I got in Men's Health, and then I thought, right, I've cracked it. I've cracked life. You know, all the girls are going to love me. All the guys are going to be terrified of me because I've got abs and things like that. And then I'll be happy. And then, of course, that happened. It was great for a few weeks, but then actually I was more depressed because I was like, why aren't I happy? And then at the same time, my dad died. And at the same time, I broke up with a girlfriend and I was really, really low. And of course, addiction came in as a support. Addiction came in as a crutch. And that's how I really like to see addiction right now. And this is what Dr. Bruce Alexander in his book, The Globalization of Addiction, would say is like, you wouldn't look at someone with a broken leg walking around in a crutch and go, oh God, they can't even walk without a crutch. And I think that's very much how addiction serves people. It's a crutch to get people through their difficult periods. And that's what it was for me. I became a binge eater, occasionally a bit of a, purging with bulimia as well. But then it went away eventually after about 10 years. And that's the thing that happens with most addictions. They go away after about 10 years. And it's because people are able to rearrange their environments and rearrange their life and rearrange their ways of thinking, meaning that eventually, in most cases, they are able to move on from the addiction. And the way I did that was I started psychotherapy. I started doing group processes like the Hoffman process and the Path of Love. And then I was no longer depressed. I was no longer anxious and suicidal, but I still had the addiction. And it was only when I discovered breathwork that I was able to find a new crutch or find a way of removing all my excess stress, dealing with my traumas from all of my life. And it meant that I no longer needed to turn to food for support and comfort. And at the same time, I discovered plant medicines like ayahuasca, and the combination of ayahuasca and breath work really enabled me to get back to being, a healthy, functioning member of society.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's an amazing journey, really. And am I right in saying that you have some background in nutrition as well?
Yeah, so when I left corporate real estate, I thought I wanted to do nutrition. I thought I wanted to be a nutritionist. I studied nutrition for a year at Westminster University, but then I realized nutrition was just, because I had the eating disorder, I thought I'll get rid of the eating disorder by learning more about nutrition. But
Right.
of course, that didn't work. So then I discovered life coaching. I then moved to LA and owned a CrossFit gym over
Yeah.
there. And then, I still wasn't really happy. I was still very dislocated. And this feeds into Dr. Bruce Alexander's book, The Globalization of Addiction, which very much says that addiction is a necessary side effect of capitalism, because capitalism uproots you from your family and from your traditions. For example, I moved to LA for a job, for capitalism. And then with that, I was out of control with my binge eating at that time. I had no family. I had a limited amount of friends. My girlfriend had a visa rejected at the same time.
Ah,
So we were doing this, transatlantic relationship. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense why my addiction was at its worst when I was living in LA, so dislocated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, and it kind of, it feels like it ties into what we briefly spoke about yesterday in regards to kind of repression as well. This idea that we, I think as a society, can have a tendency to be disconnected from ourselves, from relationships, from some of our basic needs, and as well as essentially being prevented from expressing our true selves, whether as a child when we're having a tantrum, or even in adulthood. There's that sort of repression and disconnection, which for me have been things that have been really coming up during this whole process as well. So I think it completely makes sense intuitively how some of your symptoms, the crutch, was kind of at its peak when you had that sort of greater disconnection from what we need, which is those family and those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And Johan Hari is another really great writer on these things. His
Yeah.
book, Lost Connections and Chasing the Scream, are eminently quotable. Whenever I write an essay, I've normally got one of his quotes in there. But yeah, his Lost Connections book is about how we've lost connection to ourselves, our childhood traumas. We've lost connection to each other. We don't have relationships. We don't have close communities. We've lost connection to the land. We've lost connection to meaningful work. And he also writes in Chasing the Scream about that globalization of addiction theory. And he goes and meets Dr. Bruce Alexander. And these things really tie in how drug addiction comes along when there's mass uprooting, like the gin crisis in London. People coming from rural areas into London and then them picking up gin to cope with that. And the same in Vietnam with the heroin. All these young American kids, terrified, understandably, they turn to heroin. And we have this idea, or we've been sold this idea that, oh, it's the drugs' fault. Drugs are, you cannot fight addiction of heroin. It's so strong. But with Vietnam, all those people who were basically addicted whilst they're in Vietnam came back to America and they stopped using it. They didn't need to use it anymore because they have the support of their family. And there's this very famous study called Rat Park that basically they advertised in America. They would say, look what happens when you put a rat in a cage with an unlimited supply of cocaine, and they videoed it, and it's like, this is the evils of cocaine. The rat drinks so much cocaine that eventually it dies. It just kills itself from so much cocaine. And then everyone concludes, well, it's nothing to do with us. We don't have to look at ourselves or our society. It's just cocaine is bad. That's all it is. Heroin is bad. Cocaine is bad. Well, someone then came along and was like, well, what happens if you actually take that rat out of the cage and put it in a nice environment? So they created this rat park, which is kind of like Disneyland for rats, let's say, except with rats instead of a mouse. And this rat park, they have running water, they have, chutes to run through, they have partners to have sex with, they have their family there, and the cocaine is there as well. And the rats would take a bit of the cocaine for the first few days and then weren't interested in it at all. So that whole theory that the rats would just take all the cocaine in until they died was just completely blown out of the water, because it's not true that it's these substances, it's our environment that means we need crutches like alcohol or Oxycontin in the US, or gin in London in the 18th century.
Yeah, it's so true. It actually reminds me of when we moved home, which was end of 2018, and that sort of uprooting and the change in environment. There's such great opportunities to change habits, and I found it such an interesting exercise in just not really even consciously looking to create new habits, but how just things shift because your environment has completely changed. And I think that novelty of geographical change can actually be really conducive to tweaking behaviors if you do want to from a more conscious perspective. So that's kind of, I guess, a human experience of changing the environment and finding it so much easier to improve some sort of health habits, certainly.
Mm. And I think it's things are always multifactorial. With any chronic
Yeah.
disease, it's good that it takes many different changes in our life to deal with depression or ME or whatever chronic illness you're dealing with. But yeah, sometimes people can go too much of like, oh, I just need to change jobs, then I'll be happy, or I need to repaint the house and then I'll be happy, or I need to move to Spain and get some vitamin D and then I'll be happy. I think it's a part, but it's not the whole puzzle,
Yeah.
basically. So yeah, you need to do that internal work of meditation, therapy, breath work, plant medicine, as well as removing those stressors like loneliness, not having close connections, or a terrible boss or something like that.
No, definitely. I've got a client that I'm working with at the moment, and we had a session this morning, and she decided, it must have been close to 2 months ago now, that she was going to stop her work, which she was hugely stressful. She wasn't enjoying it. She had definitely come to the realization it was having an impact on her health. And in her call today, it was almost like speaking to a different person. Her final day was last Thursday, and she was so much more expressive. She was happier, she was lighter, her energy had definitely kind of shifted. But we had the conversation around that, but also appreciating that there's a lot of other stuff that we still need to work through. But in her path, it was one piece of the puzzle. And I'm reading the book When the Body Says No at the moment, Gabor Maté, and he
Yeah, I've read
obviously
that.
makes the really important argument that, look, we just cannot separate mind from body. They are intimately interconnected. And I think it's the same thing with our health journey in our life. We can't separate what many of us will view as our health journey, which is kind of maybe the meditation, the breath work, but the diet, the supplement plan, the testing when people come and see people like me. But that can't be, I don't think that can be viewed without viewing, what is going on with your job and what is going on with your relationships and the people that you're spending your time with. They're all deeply interconnected. So to achieve great health, we have to look at all of these pieces of the puzzle, and try and, I guess, understand which do we feel are the biggest pieces in that individual, which is quite a liberating, but I think also quite a scary concept ultimately.
Yeah, I've been having some discussions with another breath worker who is very much interested in holistic healing. He's very much into diet for himself, and he's getting frustrated that, yes, I can teach people breath work, but if they're off going, getting drunk every night, eating a diet that's horrific for
Mm,
them, it's just useless. It's just really frustrating. I need to be able to affect their whole life to get them out of this chronic illness. And yeah, it's great that functional medicine practitioners are coming in, but because in the past, our Western medicine is all about separating mind, body. Your head is not connected to your
mm,
feet or things like that. And I can see with people like you, creating that integrated approach certainly is useful. But from the psychotherapy perspective, I'm studying a master's in psychotherapy at the
oh,
moment.
amazing.
I'm so frustrated with this mind body disconnection. That Freud and Winnicott and all these people, they've done great work to sort of lay the foundations, but there's not enough Gabor Mate, there's not enough Body Keeps the Score, there's not enough Bessel van der Kolk in there. And still there's a whole other dimension of the environmental stuff. I actually got a bit carried away in my last essay, talking a lot about sociological factors towards depression and addiction, and the person said that this is a really nice essay, some really nice thoughts, but this is more like a psychology or sociology essay. And I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, because we need to make these changes at the societal level and the psychological level. We can't just tell someone, oh yeah, this is just because of your Oedipal complex or you've got an attachment disorder. It's like, well, our whole society needs to wake up to the fact that it is a big part of mental health and all chronic health issues.
Mm. Yeah, it's really tricky to put into words, I think, some of that. Like, I'm, as many know, going through, as we all are, our own little journey. I feel like mine has had some experiences recently that have kind of acted as catalysts in pieces of that. So that's things like the breath work, and the psychedelic experiences. And it's really challenging because, I guess it can be, like I said earlier, liberating to think that actually we can look at some of these really big parts of our lives and we can look to slowly chip away at it. But it's also really challenging when we start to understand also that I think so much of this is related to our story. Like, we are a story, and what is the story we are telling ourselves? And what is the story that we have been told about ourselves, whether that's our teachers and our parents growing up and things like this. And it's been quite challenging to fully acknowledge that. So going off at a slight tangent in some ways, but this idea that, there are problems at the society level is hard to get my head around in some ways. It's like, okay, well, what do I do with this information almost? And how can I support others who have that awareness or agree with that concept? And how can I help raise the awareness of, the country, the population, the world? And I guess that's where things like the Institute of Heart Math can come into it, and some of the research that they've done. But I've definitely been struggling with that sort of concept, and feeling like we attach to our stories almost for safety. Like, it feels safer and more comfortable to be able to say confidently that I am XYZ, I am this, I've done this, I have this. But it's all just story at the end of the day. And I'm trying to have fun with that concept at this point in time. But I guess it comes back to things like the ego as well, and the sort of the death of the ego during these processes, and all of those concepts that have come up through, is it Carter Harris, the researcher in psychedelics at I think UCL.
Robin Carhart Harris.
Carhart Harris, yeah. So there are these huge concepts which really excite me. And I guess one of the things that I want to do moving forward is sort of figure out how can we make some of these vast changes. And I guess you could argue that the experience that we're all in at the moment is forcing us to look at that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think that there's a lot of things going online, like breathwork online. I'm doing a lot of online one-to-one sessions. You had one, and there's a lot of people doing Instagram live breathworks and things like that. So I know there are a lot of people taking this opportunity to go, right, well, I've got a little bit more time. Let's go in and really work on myself, work on my structures, my programs, my processes.
Definitely.
And but then I know at the same time what you're saying, that when I talk about these big things and Johan Hari and all these big societal level factors, it feels big. It feels like, am I okay to say this? Am I safe to criticize society?
Yeah.
And I think I am, because I can back everything up with a lot of damning statistics, raises in addiction, raises in chronic illness, and all these things. And there's certainly a lot of good examples in books like Chasing the Scream and Dr. Gabor Mate's work. So yeah, I guess that there's part of me that maybe thinks like I should be a politician rather than a psychotherapist. But I know that, politician, I just wouldn't survive very well in that world. But then on another hand, I hear Marianne Williamson, who's saying, spiritual people, we can't just go like, oh, that's just society. Oh, Donald Trump is just, that's just them. It's like the reason why people like, let's say Trump, if you don't like him, get in, is because people don't speak up enough. And Marianne Williamson actually stepped up and tried to run for president in the US. I don't think she made it particularly far, but it's a great example of someone yeah, really stepping up and trying to
Mm.
make these big changes.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what you said earlier around, do I feel safe to kind of criticize society and stuff? That was really well put, and that definitely resonated. I think my my ramble just then was, you basically summed it up in a sentence. But you mentioned obviously that you sort of took me through a breathwork session yesterday. So Richard, are you happy maybe just to kind of lay the foundations around what we did, and then we can maybe kind of explore a little bit more about breathwork specifically as well?
Yes. So we had a breathwork session. We did it over Zoom. You were in a nice quiet environment. We had you lay down, and I taught you this breathwork that's called conscious connected breathing. And I'm trained in transformational breathwork, clarity breathwork, and most recently Soma breathwork. So I combine a little bit of all those three things. And you've had Jessie Laute on, who's a transformational breath worker, and I think she covered some of the things that I would share. But yeah, so I think that I don't want to repeat what she said, but basically it works on these three levels: the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And physically, it's about bringing in more energy. But this is where I get a little bit like, this is where Patrick McKeown would argue about this. Patrick McKeown is kind of this grand godfather of breath work, but a very different style of breath work. And he would say that we're over breathing too much. But with conscious connected breathing, I don't think it's about bringing more oxygen in, like they say in transformational breath. I think it's about increasing oxygen pressure, because oxygen saturation for most people is already, when I'm doing it, at 100%, so it can't get any more oxygenated. As well, with the Soma stuff we do breath retention or intermittent hypoxia, and what that does is increase endogenous stem cells, or at least that's what they've shown in rat studies, as well as increasing p53, which helps with cancer prevention, and also nitric oxide production. And nitric oxide is this great chemical that helps with vasodilation of the sinuses and of the lungs, and also whisper it may help with viruses and virus protection. But yeah, like I say, whisper that. So then on the emotional level, it's about getting clear of your stuff. As if you've ever done ayahuasca, you haven't done ayahuasca, have you?
No.
But know that you clear with la purga, or the purge, or vomiting in ayahuasca. And what that is clearing some of your pre-verbal trauma from around your gut. And breath work, whilst you don't vomit, you clear in different ways, most commonly yawning, trembling, shaking, crying, all sorts of emotional releases of things that a lot of the time people are just like, I don't know where that came from. It was just energy stuck in my system.
Mm.
And that's what this breath work can do. And I so when I did a ayahuasca ceremony a couple of years ago, I had quite an interesting conversation with I don't know who, some people from, let's say, the other side from where we came from, and they gave me this impression that my job down here is to help upgrade human consciousness, a little bit like we're bringing in the next iPhone software update. That's what I'm here to do, as well as many other people. It wasn't like we have chosen you as the one person. It was like you and lots of other people have been sent here to upgrade human consciousness. And the image I got was, we are like a hot air balloon, and we are kind of skimming along the surface because we all have all these sandbags, and these sandbags are our traumas and our unprocessed emotions, or our baggage. And until we deal with those childhood traumas, until we deal with our unprocessed emotions, we can't start to soar. We can't go up to that next level of consciousness, which would be just enjoying life a lot more, being more loving, being more cooperative. So that's how it works on the emotional level. And then spiritually, you get all sorts with the spiritual stuff. People see colors, geometric shapes, conversations with guides, connection with past lives, full-blown mystical experiences. And there is a hypothesis that the breath work is increasing endogenous DMT production, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. So that's why people are getting these mystical experiences. And a really common comment at the end of a session where people will just look at me and go, "Where did I go?" They weren't there. They were just like, "Where did I go?" And I think that's the mystical experience. I think also what's happening is some of the stuff that happens with the psilocybin mushrooms and DMT is that down regulation of the default mode network, that part of
Right.
us that creates ego, that not creates ego, but it is our ego. It's our sense of self, and also the hypothalamus, and letting us sort of relax a little bit so that we can go into our nervous system where trauma is stored, at least if you believe Bessel van der Kolk, and also go into our subconscious programming. And yeah, again, I really like Dr. Bruce Lipton's analogy about our subconscious. Our subconscious mind is not, it's not like a person. You can go and say, hey, let go of that memory, or stop feeling this thing. It's just like a voice recorder or a voice mailbox, and it's got a load of messages that we tell ourselves, like, oh, you're an idiot, you're not good enough, or it's not safe to cry, or it's not safe to be powerful, or things like that. And what the breath work can do is kind of a little bit like hypnosis, is get into that voice recorder and start removing some of the old patterns that we don't want, some of the old messages, and then including some new ones. So in the breath work, you would have hopefully heard me saying some affirmations to you yesterday, like, it's safe for me to trust, it's safe for me to feel my feelings, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I just think breath work is beautiful. Like the physical sensations yesterday were incredible. So a really deep feeling of letting go of tension that I wasn't even fully aware was there. It's just like this melting away of tension with each kind of exhale that was just so therapeutic in its own right, ultimately. And then the classic things that we've mentioned before, things like pins and needles and tingling, got really intense towards the end with that kind of squeeze of the P muscles, as was one of the ways you described it well. And that was really special. But with the DMT, I felt yesterday I was seeing colors a little bit towards the end. And certainly when I did the holotropic breath work, I was seeing lots of light. And this was in obviously a very dark room with an eye mask on. So I think that's essentially what was going on there. And I know, having listened to a podcast of Aubrey Marcus's, he had a guest on once who had just come back from a darkness retreat. And he was saying by like the fourth day, he was seeing these vivid greens and reds, and same sort of concept, you know, this sort of endogenous production of DMT, which is fascinating, really. And you think of the ability of the body or the brain to do that. So I had definitely had the physical experiences. The emotional one is a really interesting one for me. So I remember you kind of giving me those affirmations, but there's definitely a part of me that still didn't feel safe to let go and like fully surrender to the emotions that were coming up. And obviously we spoke after the breath session briefly as well, and I mentioned this sort of experience of fear. And it was fear around being, I guess, my true best higher self, whatever you want to call it. But I also explained how I thought it felt more universal as well. So it wasn't just the fact that I'm scared of being my true self and expressing myself and just being me, whoever me is. But how I think it's probably quite common that we're all kind of holding back the best version of ourselves. And we've all got this fear from somewhere, from just being the sort of best version of ourselves. And then with that comes kind of real sadness, and sort of, at the time, a determination to overcome it. But what I find really frustrating is within like 10 minutes of stopping the breath work, I was speaking to a client this morning about it, and he made the good point. It's almost like the ego comes back, the default mode network has returned, and now you've got the fear of going out there and doing what you wanted to do and what came up during the session. Is that something that you find either with yourself or through stories that clients have said?
Well, yeah, I think we come into this kind of self-protective mode. You know, we've learned from childhood certain things are not okay. Like, I can remember being a young child and maybe get kicked in the face with a football, and if you cried at that, that was, you know, you had to lay your head low for weeks. As a boy, you just couldn't cry. And for me now, it's really difficult to cry. I actually love going to the cinema on my own so that I can cry. As sad as that might be, I actually really like it. You know, just me and, you know, a few other people watching Winnie the Pooh crying. That was, yeah, the last film I think I saw. But yeah, I think also what I was thinking was, again, going back to Marianne Williamson, and she has that famous quote that our biggest fear is not that we are weak, it's that we are powerful beyond measure. And by shining our light, we unconsciously give other people to shine at the same time. And I think that's just such a beautiful message. And yeah, I don't know how that resonates with you, Alex.
Yeah, I think it kind of hits the nail on the head, really. It's, you know, it is about that fear of true expression, of having it all, so to speak, not necessarily materialistically, but having your dream. So yeah, I think it kind of deeply resonates. So yeah, that was kind of, I guess, a big an emotional element of it. And then this idea of just release, you know, emotional, energetic release, not knowing what it is or where it's from or what actual trauma it is, and also appreciating that I don't need to know that. And that, I think, is one of the things that seems really kind of helpful with breath work, is this idea that I don't actually need to know what this trauma is that I'm releasing. I'm just releasing something and it feels really good.
Absolutely. And I was just reading the other week Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine, and he's a real sort of, you know, the OG of trauma stuff. And he very much says, like, gives examples of how memory is just so flawed. You know, eyewitness testimonies, whenever you get them together, they're always massively different. And so, you know, juries in courts are actually being proven to be pretty ineffective. And it's the same with our own minds of, you know, we feel bad, we feel depressed, we want to understand why. So we can conflate some memory that doesn't actually exist and be like, oh well, I'm depressed because I was abused or something. And there are a lot of cases of people with mental illness creating stories of, you know, really horrific things, like my parents did these things to me. And they're actually like support groups of parents who have been wrongly accused of, you know, molestation and abuse and all sorts of things, because the memory is so unreliable. And that is why I love breath work over psychotherapy. Like I was saying, psychotherapy is really useful in some regards, but as Dr. Stanislav Grof, who invented holotropic breathwork, said, his clients could give you PhDs in their problems. They could explain their Oedipal problem, their attachment disorder, whatever you like, but it wasn't until that he created the breathwork that their problems were able to change. And the fact that you don't need to know exactly, you know, what my diagnosis is, it makes no difference to your ability to heal. Actually, where healing comes from those deep physiological changes of the nervous system and of our subconscious minds.
Definitely. And it's like, I was speaking to Dr. Tom O'Brien yesterday evening, and he's got a background in sort of chiropractics. And it was like speaking to Dr. Kaylee on the podcast a month or so ago, this idea of, in chiropractics, removing the interference that is essentially preventing the healing. And again, not really needing to know necessarily in this context what the interference is. And I think that's what maybe draws me to breath work so much. It's having had so many conversations over the years with clients where they, as you say, they know there's a problem. They can kind of intellectualize it and they understand it analytically, etc. But if anything, sometimes I wonder whether that's just kind of almost reinforcing the problem anyway. It's kind of that surrendering and letting go of the energetic imprint, or whatever you want to describe it as, that I think can be so healing. And like you were saying around crying, like how much better do we all feel after just a good cry? And yet we as a society have kind of issues around that as well, I think. It's a sign of weakness, especially maybe more so for guys and girls, but maybe that's not even that true sometimes, depending on the community you are in. So it was all very interesting.
It is, and it is true. My last essay quoted a meta-analysis, and certainly the media still portrays masculine vulnerability in a very negative light. That's not just that is verifiably true still.
Right.
And I think that there's a great saying that with depression, anxiety, it's not, life isn't about being happy. Happiness is a side effect of a life filled with meaning, and a life filled with meaning often comes with ups and downs. And actually feeling better is about better feeling. I don't know who came up with that quote, but I love it. It's being able to feel anger and express it at the right time, at the right person, in the right amount. It's being able to cry when something really sad happens. It's being able to dance with joy when something really beautiful happens, without being like, oh, am I going to get told off, or is someone going to think I'm a bad dancer, or something like that. It's the full expression of humanity. That's what leads to a satisfactory life.
Yeah, I love that quote, and it's so true. I mean, that comes back to something I mentioned when I had my sort of friend Harry on the podcast after my first psychedelic experience. This idea of, I had a realization that I think I guess for protective reasons, I was protecting myself from too much kind of sadness, but by doing so, protecting myself from actually too much joy. And I know that partly comes back to, as we always talk about, these first 7-8 years of life, and how we're the sponge and we're absorbing things. And my mum has this brilliant, she doesn't get excited about things because she doesn't want to get her hopes up too high and then have them taken away. As like so many of us have that kind of approach to something, for example. And I can only assume that I've kind of taken that on as my own way of doing things. And I'm very much aware that I've done that plenty of times over the years. But you're taking the best parts of life away from yourself, really, by doing that, because you're not allowing yourself to have that sheer excitement for something coming up, even if there is a risk that it might not happen. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is allow myself to feel that feeling, but just not attach to it so much that I'm going to be distraught if something doesn't happen that I'm hoping or expecting to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a sensible protective mechanism, and especially if you're not able to go to those depths, those depths of pain or disappointment, or as a child you weren't met in that disappointment, or you were, a parent reacted with anger or aggression to your disappointment. If you don't have that support, then it makes sense. Okay, I'm just not going to go there, because I know that if I go down to those depths, it's going to be overwhelmingly painful. Excuse me.
That's okay. So I'm curious, Richard, like with all of your sort of breath work and your journey so far, and if you don't mind me asking, it's a little bit of a personal question, are you aware of how things have kind of changed for you? Like, do you feel you've evolved in certain ways because of what you do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess most therapists, I would say, or healers, get into it because to heal themselves. And certainly I needed a lot of healing: anxiety, depression, eating disorder, all those things. And I mean, I'm not an addict anymore. 18 months of free from binge eating. I feel sad at times, which I'm actually happy about. Like, I can feel and I can cry, because when I was depressed, I was just numb. I didn't cry. I didn't cry when my dad died. I didn't cry when my girlfriend, or I broke up with my girlfriend, and I didn't feel happy. I couldn't dance with joy. I couldn't make a fool of myself. I was just so imprisoned in my own self, imprisoned in my judgments of myself and judgments of other people. And yeah, as a healer, or I've done various different healings, from life coaching to breath work and psychotherapy and holistic counseling. It gives me that sense of meaning. And yeah, I mentioned before, happiness is not the meaning of life. This is, or I don't know what the meaning of life is, but the Russians kind of laugh at the American right to pursue happiness, because they think that happiness is not the meaning of life. Happiness is just something that yeah, is a byproduct of a meaningful life. And I feel like helping other people, speaking up about mental health issues, speaking up about my own disastrous life, gives me meaning, because it has the potential to help some people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it reminds, there's a book called Happiness by Design. I can't quite remember who the author is, but one of the like main points is basically, where is your attention? Which I think is quite a simple and nice, effective way to think about it, which kind of does, I think, align in with what you're saying, which is why I bring it up, which is, if you're placing your attention on, I guess, finding purpose and having meaning and connection, then by default, you're going to be increasing likely your happiness. I certainly have this kind of longer term vision of setting up some sort of retreat type location where we can do fun exercise and we can do the breath work and the meditation and the plunge pool and all these sorts of things, and just form a little community around it. Because I think, yeah, I think that's, it's what many of us needs. I think, meaningful relationships, that kind of deeper connection. I think we're all longing for that ultimately, and we all have it to different levels at the moment. But I, at the beginning of the year, we spent, as the team at the London Clinic of Nutrition had 2 nights, 2.5 days at 42 Acres retreat in Somerset. So that's where I met kind of Jesse, and we did some breath work. There was some yoga. We had a couple of gong baths. And it was such a great experience of coming together with like-minded people who are kind of interested and wanting to kind of grow. And it was just so healing. Everyone was just like, oh my God, and I was just like, I just want to live like this. That is how we've sort of evolved ultimately, in small networks, small tribes. We all probably had a role to play of some sort. And it's trying to get back to some of that, I think, in today's society, which is obviously very challenging, but something that we need people to be talking about to begin with, if nothing else.
Yeah, definitely. And what you're saying about connection, I think, is so important. And I think one of the things about trauma is it prevents you from feeling safe enough to connect. And that's another reason why whatever therapies you choose are so effective at making you happier. Maybe they are, getting rid of childhood traumas and things like that, and they're helping you process emotions, but it's also making you feel safe enough to make new friends, connect with a loved one, get support from a loved one. And that connection is so important, as we're seeing in lockdown right now, how tough life is when we don't have those really tight connections.
Yeah, definitely. It's that, and that physical touch as well, like having that taken away from us, apart from the people we're living with potentially. But there's been such a drop in obviously everyone's physical contact, and it does kind of worry me what the consequences of all of this will be over the next year and more, from a health perspective, with the lockdown, let alone with the consequences potentially there could be from the post-viral fatigue type element of things. So I mean, time will tell, but we need a shift. We need a cosmic shift.
Yeah, well, I think it's coming. I think it's coming with all the research that's going into plant medicines, as you said, Robin Carhart-Harris and John Hopkins in the US. And there's a great new documentary on Netflix, I think it's called Have a Good Trip. And it's
really?
all about, all about psychedelics. It's got Sting, Ben Stiller, Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys, Sarah Silverman, like a load of celebrities
Amazing.
doing this kind of documentary. It's kind of like an after-school special piss take, but it's pretty funny at the same time as being, yeah, shining, some truths on it, and it's pretty like real. It's not just like do psychedelics. They're going to solve the world's problems. It's like they're great, and then they also have, sometimes people can have a bad trip if they're not in the right setting. So they're giving a relatively balanced viewpoint. And so yeah, I think there are technologies that are coming as well to help with that. Have you heard of the Apollo Neuro?
Oh, no.
The Apollo Neuro. So I've ordered this. It's basically like a wristband, or you can wear it on your ankle, and it kind of sends out vibrations. And they've done a lot of research on it, and apparently it's a bit like getting a hug. And apparently it's really good for children with autism. They've done a lot of research on
Wow.
autism, and that makes me think like, okay, yes, Alex, you and I are speaking over Zoom. We don't actually have that physical contact, but actually maybe we'll be able to get hug-like sensations, oxytocin producing things from technologies like the Apollo Neuro, or there's the Sensate
Yeah.
meditation pedal, which I've tried as well. So I think there are going to be technologies to help. I just saw a new study come out today that's showing that transcranial direct stimulation, TDCS, like the Halo Sport headband and other things, have got further safety. They don't affect the metabolism. So whilst there is going to be a lot of fallout from coronavirus and the lockdown, and people are saying how bad mental health is going to become, I think I have quite high hopes for humanity. I think that people will develop technologies and practices and things like that can really keep a pace with our growth, and so that humanity and society and civilizations can keep progressing. And I know there's a lot of arguments about progress and rampant progress, and the the, the negative effects of progress, but I also have high hopes for sort of the environment as well, and technologies helping there as well.
Yeah, I like the positivity.
You call me on a good day.
Brilliant. And do you have any do you have kind of a vision, Richard? Do you know where you kind of want to go? Is it kind of just incorporating all of these different skills that you're developing?
Yes, I do. So technically I should be in Peru right now doing my shamanic apprenticeship
Oh,
in
wow.
ayahuasca, but of course that got cancelled because of coronavirus. So yeah, my plan is to train under a Shipibo shaman over in ayahuasca. Over in Peru in ayahuasca. I then hope to get involved with some research, and continue my studies in psychotherapy, so that once these things are legalized, which it looks like they're going that way, or not legalized, let's say they made prescription, I'm able to work with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and then integrate the breath to help with integration of those things. Because these big trips, maybe there's things that you do once in your life or once a year, they're amazing, but it's the integration that really matters. And I think breath work is just the pinnacle. It's the best thing I've found so far to help with integration. So yeah, my vision is a combined mental health strategy that includes breath work and plant assisted psychotherapies. But then as well, I'm fascinated in biohacking and things like that. I think mental health is that's only one leg of the table. We also need people like you giving nutrition advice and environmental advice, and making sure people are not fried by EMFs and
Right.
volatile organic compounds in their air. There's so many facets of it that I can't cover in a 90-minute breathwork session.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of my, not frustrations, but one of the things that I'm trying to navigate is how can I cover as much of this as possible, which it sounds a little bit like basically what you're doing as well. Because I think the more we can do as an individual kind of coach, in some ways the better. And all I mean by that is, it's hard to be able to go to, like, 10 different practitioners for your nutrition, for your life coaching, for your environmental medicine, or whatever it may be. So having as much under one roof as we can, I think, can make just a big difference and make it easier for the client or the individual, so they can have one source, and it's got to help streamlining the process somewhat.
Mm. Yeah, I think that is a big block to, being the ultimate practitioner. But I guess it speaks to the resilience of the human system. Let's say on average, your ME sufferer has 7 different influences that have caused their ME, from childhood trauma to a vegan diet high in pesticides to living by a 5G tower and all the other things. That shows that, right, it takes a lot of different things to knock our system out of place. And then of course it makes sense that you're going to need maybe another 7 different practitioners to get rid of those things and get people back on their feet. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. But yeah, certainly I would like to be a part of something that is addressing people's needs from that full spectrum of support.
No, it's a huge thing. I think this concept of resilience is something that I'm particularly interested in, because ultimately that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to trying to enhance our resiliency, whether that's making it better from a good position or improving it from a poor position, so to speak. And that takes all of the different concepts that I guess especially are discussed in sort of the biohacking world, or at least the people I follow in the biohacking world. So the role that sunshine plays within all of this, it's not just about vitamin D. It has these kind of vitamin D independent mechanisms going on as well that might be influencing the microbiome. I posted a paper recently on like liver inflammation and how sunshine might have a positive role to play there. So it takes us back to these fundamental things, and again takes us back to this conversation that we have a society that makes it just really hard to thrive in health, unfortunately. And it's trying to improve how we live our lives, and that may go all the way through to what job do we do, and do we need to consider how to optimize these things, which might include revolutionizing things like work and where we live, if we really want it. Having said that, most of us can make some small changes that, if done consistently, do make a considerable difference to our health. So I try and avoid too many generalized statements, although it's quite hard when you're just in a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's quite positive. Another positive I'm bringing is there is a real uptake in corporate wellness, and a lot of people getting interested in breath work and things like that. So companies are realizing that, okay, we can't just flog our employees until they burn out. Actually, we need to support them in more than just putting money in their back pockets.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the classic I guess Apple statistic around how many of their pieces of equipment and their gadgets have been created in that 20% of allotted time where employees are kind of just following their passion, rather than the project that they've been put on, if that makes sense. Have you heard about that?
No.
So apparently, at Apple, 20% of employees' time can be spent on like a passion project, basically. And apparently the majority of products that Apple have created come from that 20%, where people have autonomy. They kind of probably have a degree of mastery over it because it's the thing that they're kind of passionate about. And that's where a lot of their success has come from. So they have this degree of, basically one working day a week where they can do what they want and follow their true purpose and passion. And as a result of being able to do that, the idea is a lot of products have come out of that sort of small chunk of time, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
Excellent. Richard, is there anything we haven't mentioned that you would like to share with our listeners?
I think I'd just like to share a little bit about Patrick McEwen's work and sort of over breathing. I think a lot of people over breathe, and I think that people, when they see the mouth breath, if they're aware of Patrick McEwen's, they go, "Well, I'm not going to do conscious connected breathing because it's chronic over breathing and it's mouth breathing." And I actually was listening to Dan Brule and Patrick McEwen having a little Skype call the other day, and yeah, Patrick McEwen was very much like it's not the acute breathing that I'm worried about. It's, you know, when you're sleeping and walking and day to day. And yeah, I think it's really important for people to know how important nasal breathing is. We should be breathing through our noses pretty much all the time. And we had a little chat earlier about how you are taping your mouth to sleep, and my girlfriend tapes her mouth to sleep, and I can't tape my mouth because I've got a big beard, but I tape it for when I'm doing CrossFit or running, because there's so many benefits to nasal breathing, from, you know, just the hairs filtering out things, to the nitric oxide production, which helps with vasodilation, which also helps with, like I said, whisper it, virus and bacteria prevention, as well as humidifying and warming our air. All these things happen when we breathe in through our nose. So yeah, if I could give people a little tip for life, especially in polluted cities and coronavirus places or busy trains or wherever, it's, yeah, make sure you're breathing through your nose.
Yeah. And I think I'm right in saying just like general oral health, it's good to be breathing through the nose, because obviously by doing that, you're keeping more moisture within the mouth, and saliva has kind of that antibacterial property. So for teeth health, it would be good to breathe through the nose day to day as well.
Yeah, definitely. The my girlfriend's morning breath is so much better when she takes it.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I guess that is a good point, because I was speaking to a friend about the whole sort of Patrick McEwen versus, you know, most other breath work. You know, a lot of the breath work I've done is mouth breathing. It is kind of getting more oxygen in and things like this. And we were wondering what the debates would be ultimately, but you've kind of cleared that up perfectly, which is great. So hopefully that's really helpful for people.
Mm.
And anything else that you want to share with our listeners, either around your journey or breath work? How can people reach out to you maybe?
Yeah, so I am the breath geek, christened that by the Clarity Breathwork facilitators. The Clarity Breathwork is very spiritual, it's very heart-centered, it's very feminine, amazing practitioners. But when people would ask them things like, oh, you know, what's happening? Why are we breathing through the mouth? And they would be just like, oh, because when we breathe through our mouth, it's shows we have more engagement with life. And I was like, okay, that might be true, but also all those things about nasal breathing and like oxygen pressure and things like that. And someone would ask a question, and by the end of the retreat they were just like, just ask the breath geek. We don't know. And so I got christened the breath geek because I'm very much into the nerdy stuff behind breath. And so you can find me at thebreathgeek.com. I'm on Instagram, _breath_geek, and Facebook at the breath geek as well. And reach out, send me a DM, slide in a DM on Instagram, and it'd be great to answer any questions or let me know what you think.
Yeah. And are you doing any online stuff at the moment during lockdown that people can sort of join in on?
Yeah, so I'm mainly doing one-to-ones, one-to-one 90-minute Zoom sessions. I do quite a few closed groups. So I do groups for people who say, oh, we've got 4 people. I have a group of counselors who want to come together to do breath work. And about once a month I do an open group as well. But if you want to come for a one-to-one, or you have a group of people who would like to do some online breath work, please reach out.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is, based on our experience yesterday over Zoom, I think people, if they're not, especially if they're not used to breath work, or maybe if they're only used to breath work sort of face to face, so to speak, it's incredibly powerful even over Zoom. So, you know, don't feel that we need to wait until lockdown is over to get back into these things. I think I can hand on heart say that it's worth doing these, even if it is over Skype or Zoom, because it was a really powerful experience yesterday ultimately. So I would encourage people to to reach out and to explore this, even if they can't get to an actual class, for example?
Yeah, I know there are definitely benefits to doing it over Zoom rather
Mm.
than one-to-one. You know, I'm based in Hammersmith in London, and after a breathwork session, you are incredibly open and energetic and vulnerable. And if you have to get back and go on the tube or drive a car, that is not an ideal integration. So yeah, being able to do Zoom sessions in people's own homes where they can just go and, you know, lie on the grass outside is hugely beneficial.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, actually. So yeah, check Richard out, everyone. Um, and obviously reach out to me if you've got any questions as well. I'm happy to help out if I can. Richard, thank you so much for sparing some time to come onto the show. Thank you for your time yesterday as well. It really was a reminder for me, I think, of the power of the breath and certain things that I want to continue to kind of explore within breath work and outside of breath work through journaling and stuff like this. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alex.